Right, all screws back in position. I'll put the shutter release button on front of the camera for convenience of operation, if for nothing else. That's looking good. Right, before I do these screws up here, I need to get my coupling in for the meter. Now, I was very careful to make sure that the meter drum was correctly positioned. It's not hard on the Reflex 3, you can tell, because you can see the position of the dial, the thing at the top here, so you know whether you're correctly positioned or 100 miles away from it. With the Reflex S, it's a bit more awkward. So, here's my shaft that couples the meter cord and its drum to the shutter mechanism, or to the front rings of the shutter really, and that has to push into place on the cable drum. Of course it doesn't want to usually. Slacken these screws slightly so I can shift the front plate sideways as required to get this aligned up. Sometimes this will drop straight in for you without a fight. I have known it to happen. Other times it will not. Yeah, there's flats on the shaft and they've got to engage with the drum. I'll just put a touch of molybdenum on those. The corners on this particular one are fairly sharp, so it's got no lead in. There it is, it just snapped into position. This pinion, I'm just putting a little bit of molybdenum paste on that where it runs on its shaft. Shutter speed is set at 1 second at the moment, which is just ideal for the present time. Let's just tighten those screws up slightly. I can tell that that's a long way from tightened back as far as it needs to be, but it'll stop things slopping about. So the shutter control rings at the front of the shutter, they're our next task. Now these have all been cleaned. The only unusual thing here is that this brass ring, you'll notice that it has the appearance that it's been polished. They don't normally look like they've been polished. So I wonder whether somebody had done that at some stage in the past in an effort to get this to run smoothly. They don't normally look like that, they're just normally a smooth brass machined finish, but they don't have a polished look like that. So this spring goes on here. Let's see if I can get this hooked in position. Again, this spring is normally sits over the pin here quite firmly. Doesn't usually show any enthusiasm to fall off. And because it's loose, that sort of suggests that somebody's had it off. It's Look at the other end, is that a little bit tighter? It normally sits over that little pin quite firmly. That end sort of clipped into place. Right, where's my other piece? Here it is. Only goes on one way. A little spring clip. Keeping that under tension. Hook that into position. I'm just checking that that revolves smoothly around there, and it does. It appears to revolve absolutely fine. If there was any feeling of roughness there, well, normally what I do is I just sprinkle a bit of graphite powder in there, work it backwards and forwards, and then blow the excess out. But I don't think it needs it in this case. This brass ring here, I'm just going to wipe that with the molybdenum paste, and I'm just putting a tiny smear on there, it's just like a dirty mark. The same with the inside edges. I'm not expecting to have to do much to that, and this fits on like that. Let's see if we can revolve that to position. Yeah, that's that's unusually smooth in its action, which is suspicious. And somebody's done something to it. This ring here, this couples to the shutter speed setting cam on the camera here. Let's just put that right onto the shutter. Now that's in the B position there, that's all correct. This ring is the ring that opens the aperture, opens the lens aperture to the full aperture for viewing. See if I can swing this into position without disturbing anything. I'm getting my timing correct, and that's probably about there. And as I cock the shutter, you'll see that this lever swings down, and that would open the aperture on your lens. And when you fire the shutter, that would come back up, allowing the diaphragm to shut down to the set aperture. I'll just pop my three screws in that hold this in place. There's one screw is much longer than the others, and that goes in this position over here, the side closest to the shutter release. It goes right into the back plate there. I'll tighten those three screws up. From memory they were loose when we started. This sets our shutter speeds, and they counter rotate. You can see those dials counter rotate, and as I set my shutter speed, as I turn my settings wheel at the bottom here, you'll see that the aperture setting shifts along with the meter ring at the top. So B at f1.9 is the point where we put the meter back into the camera, and you'll notice that the cutout in the bottom, the front of this ring here, is pointing to the front of the camera at that point. So what's it like? Let's give it an 1/8 of a second, and let's set the self timer. There's a latch lever, of course, that you have to hold in while you set the self timer. Let's go. So the shutter's closed, the lens would have closed down to the taking aperture. Mirror and capping plate, of course, is swung up out of the way. And there's the shutter fired. So the shutter opens and closes for the exposure. And then it's not until you cock the shutter, capping plate's down, mirror swings back out of the way, swings back into the viewing position, and then it opens the shutter for you to view again. So that's all good to go. So that part of the job is virtually done. I've still got to set my distance here from the film plane to the lens mount at this point, and I've got the number written down somewhere, but I can't find it at the moment. But I've got a dial gauge to set that up with. So I'll do that next. Now we're done in here, so this plate can come out that I'd put in temporarily to hold that spring. And there are two screws that go here on that chrome trim. Sometimes that chrome trim is, has been bent back up quite a lot when someone's been servicing the camera, and so it doesn't sit down neatly, and certainly wouldn't sit down neatly unless it had two screws holding it down. So those screws are relatively important. Drop those down. I won't tighten them right up yet because I might want to adjust the front. This pillar supports the top cover. Screw that into place. Oh, that was our frame counter hitting number 1. Yep. That all seems to be working smoothly enough. Right, well, I'll set my distance at the focal plane there, and then I will carry on. That all went very well. The focus is good now. I didn't need any special adjustment really. It's just where I expected it to be correct. It was correct based on previous experience. I'm just checking the flash now to make sure that's okay. Now this is set to X flash sync. It's set to a 500th of a second, and yeah, it works. You probably didn't see that because the video camera may not have recorded that, but the flash was visible, and it was visible through the shutter, so it was timed correctly and worked, which is the important thing. So far so good. The base plate, I can put the camera's correct base plate back on now. At the moment I've got my base plate that I use when I'm assembling the camera, and this is one that's taken from a scrap camera, and it's got the bottom lip here notched out. That allows me to get the front section in. Normally that would be pretty difficult because it hooks in underneath that plate. So this is just one I use for testing purposes. So I'll find the original part. Right, remove the advance lever. Yeah. And something was just trying to pop up out of position there. It was the advance lever, I think. Let's click that back into position. Hope that wasn't disturbed at the top of the camera. I think we're good to go. If it backs up too much, it can cause grief. It's not hooked up correctly. That's better. Let's try a film advance lever in here and make sure that my timing between the film advance shaft and the cocking rack didn't jump. I think we're good to go. No, that's good. Right, let's put all the screws in the base now. Been putting these screws back on, and it's worth taking great care at this point that you don't accidentally use the chrome plated screws which are intended for the top cover when you're fixing the trim back on the base plate. These screws in the base plate are nickel plated, not chrome plated. And when you've got your eye in for it, you'll spot them straight away that one is nickel plated and one is chrome plated. Nickel plated screws look yellower than chrome plated screws, or chrome plated screws look bluer than nickel plated screws. It's easy to spot them when they're side by side. It's not always easy to spot it when you haven't got anything to compare them with. It's not uncommon to find cameras that have been reassembled and the chrome screws have been used internally, and nickel plated screws have been, being the last ones standing, have been used on the top cover. That's chrome plated, that's chrome plated. I'm short one nickel plated screw, there it is. I suppose it's much easier with cameras that have completely different size screws holding things in different places. You would have less opportunity to get mixed up. That's good. Well, I could put the leatherette back on the base at this stage. We'll get the leatherette on the front of the camera first, I think. I'll just pop 2 screws in the advance lever to hold it. At every stage when you're working on the camera, you need to be testing to make sure that you haven't disturbed something while you've been doing some task. So you don't want to get well down the track and discover that there was a problem with stage 1, and you're going to have to strip it back down and start again. That's very frustrating. And with some cameras it's more common than others. Retina reflexes, it has to be said, you can spend a lot more time stripping them back down again than most other models. They have a lot of subtleties and a lot of things can only be done or dealt with or adjusted when the front of it is off the camera and the camera is completely dismantled. Now this terrible noise here is just me. Well, I wasted a good 10 minutes telling you about all the joys of fitting the original base plate back in position and the importance of making sure you had the correct screws in the correct places, only to discover that the camera wasn't recording. So we'll take that bit as read. I'm going to put the leatherettes on the front of the camera now, not the base, because I may need to adjust the position of the reflex mirror to ensure that the finder image and the focus of the image at the film plane match, and that's done down here. So I won't put the leatherette on the base of the camera yet, I'll just put the leatherette on the front. So make sure I've got my adhesive and a toothpick for spreading. We'll start with the right hand piece. Right hand as you hold the camera. And I'll fight my way into this tube of adhesive because the top doesn't want to come loose. Well, we'll work around that. Now the leatherettes, I've scraped all the dried adhesive and any corrosion products and rubbish on the back completely off them, so they should go on fairly well. The leatherette on the other side of the front, which I've yet to fit, I'll be fitting in another minute or so, that's interesting in that it has cracked. Now I noticed a crack before I had even taken the leatherette off the camera, and I suspect, though I'll never know, that it happened because someone servicing the camera didn't remove the leatherette completely, just pulled it back far enough to allow them to get the front off the camera, and the leatherette didn't like being hinged back that far. Anyway, let's see if we can get this piece of leatherette in position. Leatherettes tend to shrink over time, whether it's the plasticizers going away or what it is, I don't know, but they do shrink over time, and so it's not always easy to get them to fit back correctly, particularly if you've got a situation where you've got multiple bosses sticking up that you've got to fit the leatherette around. In this case of the front of the camera, this is fitting very well indeed. I've missed something there, let's just peel that back up. Now there's a little cover plate here that fits over this port on the front of the camera. So we'll just put a couple of spots of adhesive on the corners of that and slide that into position. We certainly don't want to overdo it because you don't want adhesive running in to the works of the camera where it could potentially jam things up. So that piece of leatherette's on anyway, and I'll prepare the next piece. This was the piece that was cracked, so it's going to be a bit entertaining. Right, the crack I can disguise with some black wax if required. Afterwards, once all the adhesive is fully cured and dried and everything is stuck back and there's no danger of it peeling away again, I can come and fill any cracks up with some black wax. That's if there's anything visible. There may not be. Get rid of that sticky bit of paper. Yes, that crack falls pretty much right on line with the edge of where the leatherette would have been folded back from. I'll see if I can mould both edges together so that it's not being spread apart and opening the crack. And I can see the crack actually extends up further than I first thought. It's obvious down here, but I can see the crack extends in the leatherette higher up, so we'll get that leatherette glued back. I'll push those pieces together as much as I can and just make sure that's lying flat with the side of my tweezers. Now the piece up here goes underneath the edge of the door, of course, so that's completely hidden, so I don't need to focus much attention on that end at all. It's just this point here. Just rubbing off excess glue that had squeezed out there. It comes off quite easily while it's partly cured. Yes, if I push that leatherette together, that crack just disappears, you know, it's absolutely invisible. I don't know how it's going to dry. We'll see how that goes. But so far so good. I'd better deal with this shutter release button, which I think needs to be cleaned a little bit before I pop that back on. So it's got quite a bit of adhesive here where it's been glued back on, which tells me someone's had it off, of course. If it's not taken off, no one needs to glue leatherettes back on. And that should go back on without any fights. Just pop that in. That's got an unusual screw on it. It's unlike any other on the camera because it's got quite a large head size for the screw. It's actually the same screw as holds the focus helical on a Retina 2A camera to the lens standard. It's the same size as that. Well, that's good. Now, of course, there's a leatherette patch that goes on that lever, and I might just as well glue that back now while I've got it in mind, because it's small and small pieces tend to get mislaid. Where's it gone? That's what I'm looking for. One of them. Get some adhesive on a toothpick. Apply it to the back of that leatherette patch. Make sure it's spread evenly and hopefully not too thickly. And then the patch can go on here. Yeah, that's nice and neat. How's that crack getting on? No, it's more visible. It doesn't really want to stay pressed together. It's not bad. I don't think I've got much control how that decides to dry. We'll just have to hope for the best. So yes, leatherette at the base of the camera, not yet, because I want to get my focus, make sure that the focus is correct on the screen. So I've got to find my prism, find out what state that's in. If the prism is very clean, if there are no specks on the focus screen, it'll go straight back on. The occasional spot of dust or something inside the prism assembly, it's not worth chasing 1 or 2 spots of dust, because it's so hard reassembling all the components without introducing new specks of dust that the chances are you could spend half the day at it and be no better off at the end of the job than when you started. So major nuisances and finders, yes. Speckles of mildew on the focus screen, yes, it's worth stripping it down and dealing to things like that. But the occasional little speck of dust in there, no, it's not worth chasing them. Right, I'll find the prism.